Hello, I've been making this Kanban board and I thought I would do a video of me making it, but I seem to have made most of it now, and now I've lost the video, so I'll just go over what I've made. So most of the project setup has just been copied from existing projects that I'm now having. I'm definitely finding that there's some things which could be automated, especially the creation of the resources Eden file seems totally pointless to keep copying that, among some other things. Maybe a create React template for site projects would be good, because there's some site specific stuff in the code generation and React query hooks that I seem to be copying across everywhere. It doesn't take too long to copy it, but just for new people wanting to create their own apps, it might be useful. Anyway, I started off just sketching out a schema and decided that I would model my board in quite a simple way. So there's just three tables or types: the board, the column, and the card. So just the schema then is a very simple file, and most of this was written by GitHub Copilot really. The important bits is that it's good to have this type directive at the top of your schema, because at the moment I've got all of this stuff that I've been testing out, but let's say I want to show you guys how it looks from the start. So now when I query this, I got nothing in my database because I've changed the namespace. So that's how easy it is to change something and see that now I've got like a blank slate. All that data that I had before is still there, and if I go and change this back, then I can still query it out and it's still there. Anyway, I've got my queries, which is just for each of the types, there's an all of that type and there's a single one of that type. Again, this is another pattern that I see a lot, and I'm thinking could be some generation or something that happens here. For mutation, it's much of the same. We have create and we have update, and the create just takes the list of things that it needs, and the update takes a list of things plus the ID plus a directive to tell it that it's an update. So again, could be generated, nothing special about this. And then these types are literally just what I've written out here, with the only special thing being this ref directive. So this is saying that when I have a column, the column entity in the database will only have this ID, name, and description. It doesn't have anything else on it, but I want to be able to go from a column to the cards that are in that column. And to do that, I'm just saying to site, if the person is trying to query cards out of this column, look for any card type where the column ID key in that card is equal to the current ID of this column. So this is what this ref directive does. And it also works the other way around. So a card has a board ID and a column ID, I think. You can check the mutation. So yeah, a card has column ID and board ID keys. So if you looked in the XT entity, you'd see these keys. And by saying ref column ID, I'm saying that when I query my card, I'll be able to get the column out of it. So to see what that looks like, we can go to our query, and you'll see that we have nothing in our all things. So to add some stuff here, I've got a bunch of these variables just specified here, but I'll probably need to change those IDs. Let's just delete this for now, and we'll do this properly because then I can copy these into my React app. Let's create a mutation called create column. So this is going to use our create column, and it's going to have a name, which is going to be called column name, and that's a required string. And then it's going to have description, which is not a required string. So let's just make sure we have column name to do, and let's not bother with a description because it should be optional. If I run this create column, it should make me a column called to do, and it's given me a column ID. I'm going to take this column ID and store this in my variables just so I can use it for later. And if I query my all things, I've still got nothing here because this is just going through the boards first. But if I add this all columns query, get the ID and the name, then I see my new column here. And let's make a new mutation then called create board, and it's going to be much the same. It's going to have column IDs, name, optionally description. And I don't know why GraphIQL inserts these things, but it's annoying. Maybe they're okay to keep, I'm not sure. So make sure I've got the right uniqueness parameters on there, and it returns the ID. So now I've got my column IDs, and I get errors here because graph IQL doesn't update properly. If I was to refresh the page, then it refreshes properly, but you don't need to worry about the errors, you can just ignore them. But this should have all of the information it needs except for name. So let's rename, so this is board name. So let's try create board. So we've got our board here, and we'll take our board ID, save that for later. And now if I query my all things, I've got my boards and I've got my columns. Still no cards yet though, so let's add another mutation called create cards, and create card, and that will create a card with the board ID, the column ID, the description, the priority, and title. So replace those things there and make sure we return something. Then we've got our board ID, we've got our column ID, we've got no priority, so let's just add that. Priority 0, and that should do. So if we create our card, we've got our card here. If we do our all things, we now get our boards, which we've got one of them, and we get our columns, which we've only got one of them, and we get our cards, which we've got one of them. So if we change the title here, test title, and add another card, now you can see we've got 2 cards in our to-do column. And let's try updating cards. So another mutation, call this update card, and much the same way, we want the board ID, column ID, description, the card ID, priority, title. Let's make sure that this is called card ID. And then let's copy this card ID. So this is test title 2, and we'll change it to test title 3 and try update card. So there we go, all things, and now we've got test title 3 and test title. So there we go, we've got CRA. Let's just add a delete now, and you can see what that looks like. I haven't done this yet. So we go to our mutation, and we've got update card. Now we just got to do delete card, and Copilot has learnt how site works, so that's cool. So it just takes our ID, and then it is a delete mutation. So one of the cool things about this new console is that we have auto refreshing, so you'll see that delete card now appears automatically. No need to refresh, no need to do anything except save the schema file. So that's pretty cool. Let's add a new mutation called delete card, and it just takes the ID, which is going to be the card ID. Okay, and let's try that one out. So just checking, we've got our test title 3 and test title. We delete our card, and now we've just got our test title. So there, crud. And now we also have a React app with this generation. So if you see here, I've got a watcher that's generating my React hooks every time I change the schema. Now it's got my delete card and update card mutations. I can actually see the generated file here, and I can see that I've got this use Kanban data query, and if I wanted to generate more queries, I would add operations here. So let's add an operation for create card, for example, and then we would literally just go to our GraphIQL, copy our mutation, don't have to change anything about it, paste it in there, save, and if we now look at our generated file, we've got create card mutation, which is a React hook, and it does our use mutation thing from React query, and yeah, very useful. So now we can write our actual JavaScript app. So I've copied this exactly from here. This code sandbox has this React Beautiful DND library, and it's just copied and pasted. We've got the hard-coded data structure here, and we just need to get our query result, which looks like this. So it's a board, which is a list of boards, and then each board has a list of columns, and each column has a list of cards, and we need to get it into a tasks map where it's indexed by the ID, and then a columns map where it's indexed by the ID and has a list of tasks. Now, even though in our database a column doesn't know anything about tasks, because of the site ref directive and the graph query that we're able to do, we basically already have the right structure here. We have cards in columns, so we just need to write some JavaScript that will index it by this ID, so we just get the IDs here. So to save you the trouble from doing that, maybe I don't know how quickly I'm going to be able to do this, because I don't really know JavaScript. Alright, I had stuff to go do, and then I was recording again and deleted it by accident again. Whoops. In the meantime, I can't entirely remember what happened before. I think I was fixing the TypeScript stuff, and then I fixed that, and I just realized that I had to change the query. So before, I can just quickly show, it was like this, so no directive, and that means that it's pulling all cards. So the query that's generated here, and this is something that I think you can do, is you can do underscore site query as a string. I actually don't know if this will work. So site query, okay, actually I've put it in the wrong place. But if I put this site query on the card here, when I query my cards here, site query, I can see that, yeah, I'm just finding all cards, so it's not doing any sort of filtering. So I've got two boards, because I've put two boards in there, but I've put the two cards I have are only in the first board. But with this default query, it's just getting all of the type of card and just shoving that on there. So I need some way of saying that when I query the boards out, the cards that are in a board are actually in that board, so they're not just all cards. And that's where I came up with this. That's one of the cool things I think about Site, is that you can always fall back to an explicit query if the implied one is not getting you the results you think, or sometimes the implied one might come up with a query that's not fast or something like that. You can always fall back to specifying it in the schema yourself. So I'm saying find all the entities where the type is card. By the way, I added this type special keyword. So we have object, which is the ID of the current type, and now we have type, which is just the type directive that we have up there, and there's also subject, which is the ID of the current user. We don't have login yet, but that is the other special keyword. So it's finding where the type is card, like it would do implicitly, but there's another where clause here, which is saying that the board ID on the card that it's querying must equal the ID of this board. And if we save that, then we can query again, and whoops, I need to delete the site query, and we see that now our cards are on the right board. And if we go back to this, yeah, we'll see that our cards are on the right board. Yeah, we're like pretty close to done. I guess I will probably stop soon because it's nighttime now. But let me just add a mutation for creating some new cards, and we'll put these cards in our new board. So if we just query out all of our board IDs, so we've got two of them, and the one we've got in there, which is our current one, our my board, that's F2, so we'll get rid of this and replace it with this. Okay, and then we can click the variable thing here, variable, and column ID will be the same. We'll keep it in the to-do column and create this. So we've got now test title 6, which is in our cool board, and if we just make another card just to make sure that this works, okay, we've got our cards going into the right board. So now let's do another column and see what happens there. So let's create a new column. Let's add a new mutation. Create column. Actually, I'm just going to go find in the history all of my mutations were made. Alright, that's the nice thing about having the state change the URL when you change this stuff, is you can go back and find it even if you accidentally close your tab. I can create a column now, and we will just change column name and description to be something else. So column name, let's say done, and let's add a description. Why not? Description, this is a description. We'll just add this here so that we can make sure our UI is handling that case properly. Create column, and now we have a done column. Okay, so this is interesting because we have that appearing on all of our boards, and that's because if we look at the structure, so I think we're going to need to do the same thing that we did with the cards, with that custom query with the columns, because we're getting all columns here. So if I just copy and paste this query, and instead of finding the cards, we'll want to find the columns, and then instead of board ID, we will want column ID, and I think that's basically it. And now we have no columns because we didn't specify them, question mark. Okay, I think this is where you bring up the REPL. Alright, so we've got our query, find col, where card is this. I wish there was an automatic formatter for closure. Okay, if I get rid of this, I should be getting, nothing. Why not? Isn't that fine? Oh, it's board ID. Okay. And then if I put my column back in, now I get my column. Okay, so my mistake. It's always my mistake, but now I can fix my mistake. Why did I change that to card ID? Okay, so there we go. They've both got to-do columns. And now I want to take that second column that I've created, and then let's add some new cards to that column. So if we look at create card, board ID, column ID, priority title, sure, let's just change the title saying done card, and then create card. And if we go back here, now we've got our done column and our done card in our cool board. And if we wanted to add it to our other board, we just change that board ID. This is looking pretty good. We've got our to-do app, we've got our API, it's filtering the right things properly using our custom queries. Then all there is to do is attach the hooks. So that shouldn't be too hard. I've got 8 minutes. We'll go back to our source. We need a callback for when we've moved the card. So is there an on drop? I haven't really read any of this code, so let's hope there is. Might be better off just searching on drag end. Okay, so on drag end, this is if it's a column. All I want to do is change column ID. So really, let me just change the schema first, because update card, the only thing that's required is the ID. All of the rest of this stuff on update card is not required. And then what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to copy this mutation. So card ID is the only thing that's required. Right, there we go. Copy this mutation, put it in as an operation, update card, paste, and now I can say const update mutation equals use update card mutation. Okay, and then I'm going to do update mutation dot mutate. I might want this somewhere else actually. This should be up here. Okay, and then update mutation dot mutate, and I'm going to need variable. I'm going to need card ID. Okay, before I do this mutation, I'm going to start printing stuff. Let's see what draggable ID is. Okay, it is a card ID, so that's good. So card ID is draggable ID, and then column ID is end cold ID. Alright, I think that's what I need. Let's check our network tab, drag this here, we get a GraphQL thing fire off. It says it's a mutation, it does update card, the variables are there's a card ID, a column ID, and now if I refresh the page, it's in the other column. So the reason that it's like popping back is that I'm still doing all of this set state nonsense. So let's get rid of this. So now it shouldn't be setting the state unless it's a reordering or a column move. So if I move this back and refresh, so I shouldn't have to refresh. I know what I need to do. So there's a thing in React Query, you can say after a mutation happens on success, and then I can do the query client dot refetch queries, I think, and instead of hard coding this string, I can do use Kanban data query dot get key. Okay, let's try that out. So now if I drag this, then it changes. If I drag this, then it changes. And you can see the ordering is not able to do anything. But I think I am, well, I've now deleted that column. But this is, you get the point. So I've achieved a Kanban system. It's very simple and there's a lot to do really. But I think hopefully tomorrow I've got like a couple of hours and I should be able to get the state handling logic nice and neat. And really I just want to be able to add columns, add cards, add boards. Those should be pretty simple. It's a button and it's a form. Once I have one of those, then doing the rest of them should be pretty easy because the mutations are just generated hooks. Then I can move between columns. I need to respect the priority and change the priority when I drag the cards around. When you create a card, it has a priority of the number of cards in the column that you're putting it in plus 1. Let's say that. So it always goes to the top. And then when I reorder it, then it just does a mutation where it changes all of the cards' priority numbers to be the order of the list. So that's going to be a fun one. Probably won't bother with that tomorrow. I'll just do the ability to add cards and boards and edit cards and boards and delete cards and boards. That will be like enough of a framework for anyone to add stuff to. And then, yeah, that will be good. Might do some optimistic update stuff, maybe not. But anyway, end of the episode. Goodbye.